All right, guys, I would like to chime in on a conversation that's been going on for a few years, and I kind of like to put my 2 cents in on it. And it's just so silly. This just shows you how childish some people are. The question is something along the lines of, is the Les Paul Studio good enough? Or is it a real Les Paul? That's the silliest one that I have ever heard. So for those of you who don't know, the Les Paul Studio is the stripped down bass model of the Gibson Les Paul. It's very much like, for example, I drive an F-150 Platinum, okay? That would be like asking if the F-150 XLT is a real F-150. You know, the main differences between the Studio and the Standard are aesthetics, and relatively small aesthetics too, especially to the untrained eye. Like just an audience member standing in the crowd. If there was me and another person playing guitar on stage, and I had this guitar, and the person standing next to me had the Alpine White Standard, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference to the untrained eye, you know? But there really are people out there who kind of like to look down their nose at people who play the Studio. Now, I will say this much. Most of the Les Paul Studios, to me, aren't very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Not really. There are very few exceptions to that. Obviously, the Alpine White. There are two different versions of the Alpine White. One with the gold hardware, one with the chrome. And I saw a Studio in a Facebook group the other day that straight up made me jealous. Just scrolling past it, I was thinking that somebody had bought one of the Slash signature Jessica Les Pauls. And I'm kind of scrolling past and I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. Why in the world is that Gibson logo a silk screen and not a pearl inlay on that Standard? And I was looking and I'm like, wait a minute. That's a Studio? Oh my, I got so jealous. Oh, it was the most gorgeous Les Paul Studio I have ever seen in my life. It had the honeyburst finish. Looked just like Slash's signature Jessica. But there's a couple of the Studios that look pretty good, but for the very most part, most of them aren't very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And again, I'll use my truck as an analogy. From the outside, looking at my truck and looking at a regular F-150, what's the difference? Okay, I have chrome mirrors and I have a big silver platinum badge across my tailgate. And that's it. That's it. Does that mean that the person that drives the regular F-150 XLT doesn't have a real F-150? No. Similarly, when you take a look at this, the only real differences that you're going to see between an Alpine White Studio and an Alpine White Standard is binding that goes around the body. With the Standard, you will see like a black outline, just like a black line that lines around the body and then goes up the side of the neck and around the headstock. And then the Gibson logo, instead of it being a silk screen here, is a pearl inlay. And that's it. That's it. Other than the fact too that I believe the Studio, the body is made out of nothing but mahogany, where the Standard, it'll have a maple top. Hey, y'all can light me up in the comments for this all you want. You're not going to convince me that that has anything to do with how the damn thing sounds. You ain't going to convince me that. No. What has to do with how it sounds are these little microphones that pick up the sound of the string. Okay? That's what has to do with how the guitar sounds. I've even heard people go as far as to say the type of wood they use for the fretboard affects the sound of the guitar. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Again, light me up in the comments all you want. I don't care. Go ahead. But the string never touches the wood. It touches the fret. How in the world is the wood of the fretboard going to affect the way the damn thing sounds? It's ridiculous. Anyway, though, go ahead. Have at it in the comments all you want. I don't really care. The differences between a Les Paul Studio and a Les Paul Standard are so minuscule. Oh, and the Studio also has weight relief, where your average Standard back in the day would be very, very heavy. They've gone through with the Studios and carved out a lot of the inner body of the guitar to relieve some of the weight, where back in 2007, when this was made, this was probably the lightest Gibson Les Paul that you could get your hands on. But other than that, if you just got home with a Les Paul Studio and you're showing it off on the internet because you're so glad you finally got your first Les Paul and people are looking down their nose at you, come on now. More than likely, somebody probably made them feel stupid one day because they didn't or couldn't afford their dream guitar, you know? That's what most people do. Usually most people try to make you feel the way they feel or the way they felt back in the day. Yes, you have a real Les Paul. And yes, it's good enough. Like I said, everybody I've ever met personally who has all three, Studio, Standard, and Custom, they all say the same thing. Their Studio gets more playtime than their Standard or their Custom. And that's funny because the reason they call this the Studio is because it was meant to be only used in the studio. Because like I said, most of them really aren't all that aesthetically pleasing, most of them. So if you still want to have that Les Paul humbucker sound and have the Les Paul experience, you know, playing in a song just to record, doesn't matter what, you know, what it looks like, then you take one of these into the studio and record with it. But oddly enough, so many people, I can't even count how many people have told me personally, my Studio gets more playtime than any other Les Paul that I have. And guess what? Most people, your average person standing in the audience isn't going to be able to tell the difference. Most people. Like 90-95% of that audience, they ain't going to fucking know. They ain't going to be able to tell. And they don't care either, you know? So I just figured I would chime in on that and put my 2 cents in on it. Like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of all of the Les Paul Studios. I am absolutely going to be grabbing me up a Standard very, very soon. Very soon. But even when I do that, I'll probably fall into the same category as the people who take their Studio on stage. When I get into a band and I start playing, I'm probably not going to be taking my Standard out to play gigs and shit. No, it's going to sit right there on that guitar stand. This right here is what I'll be taking like on the road and, well, not really on the road because I'm not going to be touring anywhere, but, you know, up on stage and, you know, getting beat up and banged up. That'll be this one. Not my beautiful Standard that I'm going to be getting here very soon. So anyway, I don't really have a solid landing point with that. I'm just in a lot of Les Paul Facebook groups, and you know how ignorant people are in Facebook groups. It's like that's where you go to look for an argument, I think. But I see that conversation going around like crazy in the Les Paul community online. So don't let anybody discourage you if you just got your first Les Paul and instead of paying $3,500 for it, you paid $1,500 for it. Yes, you still got you a Les Paul, okay? At the end of the day, as long as you can make that thing sing, that's all that really matters. So, all right, y'all, I'm out of here. Stay blessed.